The moment Angela Levin opened her mouth, something inside Prince Harry's carefully guarded world reportedly shattered, and within hours, whispers began circulating that Harry had called an emergency meeting behind closed doors. A meeting so urgent, so tense, that even longtime allies were allegedly caught off guard by the sudden panic gripping the man who once insisted he had nothing left to hide. Because this wasn't just another critic throwing shade. This wasn't another tabloid headline Harry could brush off with a rehearsed statement or a strategic silence. This was different. This hit closer. This struck at the one subject Harry had guarded more fiercely than his royal title, more fiercely than his marriage, more fiercely than his reputation itself.
Tell me that this wasn't on purpose. She knew exactly what she was doing here. Now, the question from Prince Harry and Meghan Markle at all about the lies that destroyed the final days of the...
And it's very interesting to work that out. There's two things, I think. One is that she was determined to win.
His son, Archie. And suddenly, the narrative Harry had spent years building was no longer under his control. They screamed for privacy, then turned their lives into a Netflix show. They preach authenticity, then dodged the simplest questions. And here's the wildest part. The one thing they absolutely refuse to talk about. Their own kids. Now listen, most parents can't shut up about their children. But Harry and Meghan, total silence when it matters most. The glossy photos, the carefully staged moments, the billion-dollar brand they built, it's all starting to crack. That silence, the silence that had protected them for years, was now reportedly working against them. Because according to insiders who had been quietly observing the fallout,
Levin opened her mouth and oh my God, the energy in that studio shifted. The hosts froze. The crew literally...
Angela Levin didn't just raise questions. She allegedly introduced details that, if taken seriously, threatened to unravel the carefully constructed shield Harry and Meghan had built around their private life. And Harry's reaction? It wasn't calm. It wasn't measured. It was urgent. Sources began whispering that Harry immediately reached out to trusted advisors, demanding clarity, demanding strategy, demanding control over a narrative that was suddenly spiraling faster than anyone expected.
They are scrupulous about this. They have people on the set to say, for God's sake, don't make any hygiene.
This wasn't the confident prince who once stood before cameras declaring independence from royal scrutiny. This was a man reportedly scrambling behind the scenes, trying to contain something that had already escaped. Because what Angela Levin did wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was precise. She didn't shout, she didn't accuse. She simply revealed enough to make people start asking questions again. And once those questions began, they refused to stop. All right, let's dive in. So their wedding anniversary rolls around, right? Everyone's expecting the usual show. You know the drill. Glossy Instagram photos, maybe a cute family moment, some kind of we're still relevant, look at us post. Except this time, something was different. There was no carefully timed post. No polished family portrait. No subtle reminder that everything was perfectly fine. Just silence. And silence, in the world Harry and Meghan had built, was louder than any headline. Because silence suggested something deeper, something unresolved, something fragile. Insiders began noticing subtle shifts in Harry's public demeanor, shifts in Meghan's media presence, shifts in the way their team handled even the smallest inquiries. The confidence was gone. In its place was caution. Because Angela Levin's claims hadn't simply introduced new speculation, they had reportedly triggered a chain reaction. A reaction that Harry himself could no longer ignore. For years, Harry had fought to control his own story. He had walked away from the palace. He had challenged the press. He had spoken openly about trauma, about betrayal, about pain. But now, for the first time in a long time, it seemed like the story was no longer his to control, and that loss of control was reportedly what led to the emergency meeting. Not a casual discussion, not a routine check-in. An emergency meeting, a gathering where every word mattered, where every possibility was examined, where every potential fallout was considered. Because Harry knew something others were just beginning to realize. Angela Levin's words had reached places he couldn't easily shut down. Complete radio quiet. Get this. The same couple who literally built their entire brand on getting attention, who couldn't go a week without some kind of media moment, suddenly got completely ignored or exposed. Because attention, once lost, doesn't simply disappear. It transforms. It turns into scrutiny. And scrutiny, once activated, becomes relentless. People began revisiting old interviews, old photos, old timelines. Details that once seemed insignificant suddenly carried new weight. Questions that once seemed harmless suddenly felt urgent. And at the center of it all was Harry. A man who had spent years fighting external pressure was now reportedly facing internal panic, because insiders claimed the emergency meeting wasn't just about Angela Levin. It was about damage control. It was about anticipating what might come next. It was about preparing for possibilities Harry had hoped would never resurface. Because Angela Levin hadn't just spoken, she had disrupted the illusion of stability, and illusions, once broken, cannot be easily restored. These are two people who left the royal family specifically to control their own narrative, to tell their own story, to be the architects of their own brand. That brand, once powerful, once untouchable, was now reportedly facing its most fragile moment yet. Because the emergency meeting wasn't public, it wasn't announced, it wasn't confirmed. But those close enough to observe the situation claimed the tension was unmistakable. Harry wasn't acting like someone unaffected. He wasn't acting like someone confident. He was acting like someone who knew the stakes had changed. Someone who understood that Angela Levin's claims weren't just noise. They were a threat to the narrative, a threat to the image, a threat to the version of reality Harry had worked so hard to maintain. Because narratives are powerful, but they are also fragile. And once they begin to crack, even slightly, the damage spreads faster than anyone expects. Harry had built his post-royal life on one central promise, that he would finally live on his own terms, that he would finally control his own truth, that he would finally escape the pressures that had defined his past. But now, according to those watching closely, it seemed like those pressures had found him again. Not in the palace, not in London, but in the one place he thought he was safe. His new life, his new identity, his new reality. And the emergency meeting was proof of that. Because emergency meetings don't happen without reason. They don't happen without fear. They don't happen without something triggering them. And whatever Angela Levin revealed had reportedly triggered exactly that. Fear. Not public fear, private fear. The kind that forces action behind closed doors. The kind that forces decisions nobody wants to make. The kind that signals something deeper is happening beneath the surface. And as the meeting reportedly unfolded, one question lingered in the air. Not spoken, not confirmed, but impossible to ignore. What exactly was Harry afraid of? And why now? Because timing, in situations like this, is never accidental. Angela Levin chose her moment carefully. Harry reacted immediately, and that reaction told its own story. A story not of confidence, but of urgency. A story not of strength, but of vulnerability. A story still unfolding, and still far from over. Behind closed doors, away from cameras, away from microphones, away from the carefully controlled public image he had spent years perfecting, Prince Harry reportedly sat at the center of a room that felt heavier than any royal chamber he had ever occupied. Not because of tradition, not because of ceremony, but because of fear. The kind of fear that doesn't come from enemies, the kind that comes from losing control. Because according to insiders who claimed knowledge of the situation, this emergency meeting wasn't about public perception anymore. It was about survival. Not physical survival, narrative survival, reputation survival, identity survival. The room itself, they say, was quiet. Not calm, quiet. The kind of quiet where nobody wants to be the first to speak. The kind of quiet where everyone already knows why they're there, but nobody wants to confirm it out loud. Harry reportedly didn't wait long. He broke the silence first, and when he did, his words weren't polished. They weren't rehearsed. They weren't delivered with the confident tone he once used during televised interviews. They were sharp, direct, demanding answers to questions nobody in that room could fully guarantee. Because Angela Levin had already done the damage. Not explosive damage, not dramatic damage, something far worse, process damage. She had reportedly planted doubt, not loud enough to dismiss, but strong enough to spread. And doubt, once planted, grows faster than truth. Sources claimed Harry wanted to know one thing above all else: how far this had spread. Not publicly, privately. How many people were talking? How many people were asking questions? How many people were beginning to look at him differently? Because Harry understood something that few people outside his world truly grasp. Image is everything, and once image begins to fracture, reality follows. He reportedly asked his advisors what could be done. Not what should be done, what could be done. Because those are two very different questions. What should be done implies control. What could be done implies limitation. And limitation was something Harry had spent his entire life fighting against. First inside the palace, then outside it. But now, the battle wasn't against the monarchy. It wasn't against the press. It wasn't against critics. It was against uncertainty. Against questions he couldn't easily silence. Against narratives he couldn't easily rewrite. Because Angela Levin had already said enough to ignite curiosity. And curiosity is dangerous. It doesn't need proof. It doesn't need confirmation. It feeds on possibility. It grows in silence. It thrives in avoidance. And insiders claim that realization was what made this emergency meeting unavoidable. Because Harry's team reportedly understood something critical. Doing nothing was no longer an option, but doing something carried its own risks. Respond too aggressively and it would look defensive. Respond too calmly and it would look dismissive. Respond too late and it would look guilty. Every option carried consequences. And consequences were exactly what Harry had hoped to avoid when he left royal life behind. He had believed distance would bring peace. He had believed privacy would bring freedom. He had believed stepping away would silence the noise. But now, the noise was back. And it was louder precisely because he had tried to escape it. Because escape doesn't erase attention, it redirects it. And attention had found him again. Not through official channels, not through palace statements, but through whispers, through speculation, through Angela Levin's carefully delivered claims. Claims that reportedly forced Harry to confront something he hadn't faced in years. Powerlessness. Not total powerlessness, but enough to remind him he wasn't untouchable. Not anymore. Sources claimed Meghan was aware of the situation, watching, observing, calculating. Because Meghan understood narrative better than anyone. She understood timing, she understood perception, she understood influence. And insiders believe she knew that reacting emotionally would only make things worse. So while Harry reportedly pushed for immediate solutions, Meghan allegedly urged patience, not silence, strategy. Because strategy buys time, and time allows narratives to evolve. But Harry, according to those watching closely, wasn't thinking about long-term strategy in that moment. He was thinking about immediate containment, immediate control, immediate reassurance. Because the emergency meeting wasn't just about Angela Levin's claims. It was about the possibility that more claims could follow, that more questions could surface, that more attention could return. And attention, once regained, rarely fades quickly, especially when fueled by uncertainty. Insiders claimed Harry asked whether official clarification would help, whether addressing the situation directly would end speculation. But the answer reportedly wasn't simple, because addressing speculation doesn't always end it. Sometimes it legitimizes it, sometimes it amplifies it, sometimes it confirms its importance. And that risk alone was enough to make even the most experienced advisors hesitate, because this wasn't just another rumor. This was a narrative shift. A moment where control began slipping, not completely, but enough to notice, enough to feel, enough to fear. Harry had spent years presenting himself as someone who had escaped the system, someone who had taken control of his life, someone who had rewritten his destiny. But emergency meetings don't happen when control is absolute. They happen when control is threatened. And according to those close to the situation, Harry knew that. He reportedly understood that perception was changing. Not dramatically, not instantly, but subtly, gradually, dangerously. Because subtle shifts are harder to fight. They don't announce themselves. They don't demand attention. They simply spread, quietly, persistently, until they become impossible to ignore. And that was exactly what Angela Levin's claims had done. They hadn't exploded loudly. They had spread silently, through conversations, through private discussions, through quiet reconsiderations. Because doubt doesn't need headlines to survive. It only needs attention. And attention had returned. Not fully, not completely, but enough to matter, enough to trigger the meeting. Enough to remind Harry that escape doesn't equal immunity, because no matter how far he had gone, no matter how much he had rebuilt, no matter how carefully he had crafted his new identity, his past was never fully behind him. It was waiting, watching. And now, according to insiders, it was moving again. The emergency meeting eventually ended, not with resolution, not with certainty, but with awareness. Awareness that the situation wasn't over. Awareness that narratives were shifting. Awareness that the next move would matter more than any move before it. Because once doubt enters public consciousness, it doesn't leave easily. It lingers, it evolves, it waits. And as Harry reportedly left that room, one truth had become impossible to ignore. Angela Levin hadn't just spoken. She had changed the atmosphere. And Harry, for the first time in a long time, wasn't reacting from a position of strength. He was reacting from a position of uncertainty, not defeat, not collapse, but vulnerability. The kind of vulnerability that forces decisions, forces adaptation, forces response. Because silence, the very tool that had protected him for so long, was no longer enough. And now the world was watching again. Not loudly, not aggressively, but closely. Waiting to see what Harry would do next, waiting to see whether he would confront the narrative or continue running from it. Because one thing was clear, the emergency meeting wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous, something far more unpredictable, something far more revealing. And Harry knew it. And Harry knew it. And Harry knew it. And Harry knew it.